Well, how are you doing today? I'm Woods Houghton with Eddy County Extension Office, and a lot of people don't know about all the resources that are available from the Extension Service. We have a number of publications. We probably have more publications than the Internal Revenue Service. But we also have an award-winning videographic group at Las Cruces, and they have actually been nominated and have won international awards as well as national awards for some of their work, including an Emmy. And so Dr. Janie Gleason is our videographic specialist, and she's done some really good stuff. And so we're going to show you a program that's called Green Gold, and this program talks about how the explorers came to the New World, and what they were looking for was gold, but the real treasure that they found was all the plants that we use for municipal purposes and for eating. You know, you read in the Bible and you read they talk about corn. Well, here in America, we think about corn being with ears and the yellow stuff that you chew on at 4th of July. Corn in the Bible is wheat, what we call wheat. It was what they harvested and made bread from. Ancient Mayas made bread from cornbread, and so that's how come it got called corn. So you go to corn in Middle East, it's different than what corn is here. Potatoes came from the New World, and of course, the most fantastic food ever developed, green chili. And so join us in search of green gold from Maya to the moon in just a moment.
Cine, the Council on International Non-Theatrical Events, has awarded this film a Cine Golden Eagle in token of its excellence, and has selected it to represent the United States of America in international motion picture events abroad.
Food is the fuel for human accomplishment. Ancient links between humans and plants began about 10,000 years ago and continue today. Yet they are not often obvious in a society where food and spices are born of supermarket shelves or drive-up windows. Did potatoes come from Idaho or from ancient civilizations of the South American Andes? Did corn come from the American Midwest or from ancient grass-like plants of the Mexican highlands? Did chili peppers come from Texas, or does their heritage lie in southern tropical rainforests? And if these foods do come from such exotic places and ancient civilizations, how did they become a staple in the Irish diet, a major spice in Oriental cuisine, or a snack few American moviegoers can do without? Since that fateful day Spanish explorers first set foot in the Americas, time has proven their lasting treasures were not the gold and silver guarded in heavy chests, quickly consumed by governments and greed. Rather, New World plants became the enduring treasures, the benevolent conquerors of civilizations around the globe. While many of these green gold treasures remain highly prized, tomatoes, peanuts, cocoa, and many beans, 3 New World plants have had enormous influences throughout the world. Corn and potatoes have helped feed the world's massive populations, while chili peppers spice cuisines from New Orleans to the United States Capitol. Today, however, the wild and weedy ancestors of these plants and the fragile ecosystems that support them are in severe jeopardy. Nearly 5 centuries ago, explorers came in search of riches they believed would ensure survival in a hostile and competitive world. 500 years later, New World explorers continue the search, this time, however, not to plunder, but to preserve.
It's been a real demanding trip searching for these wild chili peppers. These plants hold genetic secrets that will impact agriculture, industry, even medicine. Many people look at these wild species as worthless weeds, but hidden within that plant are genes that are invaluable, worth more than the gold or money in the world, because you cannot replace it or duplicate them now.
Paul Bosland, a plant geneticist at New Mexico State University, is following the footsteps of Paul Stanley, who in 1939 documented various wild species of chili, also called capsicum, in the Guatemalan highlands. Bosland and assistant Max Gonzalez, however, have encountered a number of disturbing changes.
One of the frustrations we found following Stanley's expedition through Guatemala is that agriculture has expanded and the native vegetation really no longer exists in the spots that Paul Stanley was at. And what we have is other kinds of farming, and the wild capsicum species cannot survive under those conditions.
What we see here is the population growing, people trying to exist and trying to grow agricultural crops. And what they've done is displace the natural vegetation for the maize, the sweet potato, and are growing that on the hillsides you see behind us.
Not to be deterred, Bosland leaves Stanley's path, seeking the advice of locals who might lead him to the elusive peppers. At this agricultural plantation, Bosland hopes to find isolated pockets of wild flora in the surrounding brush. Unfortunately, the few wild areas left are under constant attack by slash and burn activities by the plantation workers.
One of the unfortunate aspects of these wild species is that they are weeds. They have no economic value, commercial value for local people to use. In a sense, they try to eradicate it.
We are going to go to Mazatenango Retauleu.
As a last resort, Bosland searches local marketplaces, attempting to find the valuable genetic treasure of the wild chili peppers. After visiting a number of areas, fear grows that the genetic treasures which existed in Guatemala only a half-century ago cannot be found. Population demands on natural areas, deforestation, and urbanization have all severely affected the environment.
It's been a very disappointing trip in a sense for me, not being able to find these species. The biggest disappointment is that we've lost this species forever, that we won't be able to use it for the potential products that could come about in the future. What it means to us is that these species are extinct, their use, their valuable genetic resource is gone forever. Doesn't matter how much money you have, you can't bring the species back. And so it's a loss not only for us, but for future generations.
Sally McKenzie, a molecular geneticist at Purdue University, is worried. She sees the raw material for her research disappearing at a startling rate. McKenzie relies on people like Paul Bosland to seek out these New World treasures bearing genes needed for our modern crops. Without this genetic variability, or germplasm as scientists call it, the future of the world's food supply looks bleak.
Well, right now, our diversity is all that we've got available for developing new varieties. So in essence, if we lose the genetic diversity we have for any one crop, then our plant breeding efforts, in many respects, come to a halt.
The concern is real when one considers that of approximately 20,000 plants with edible or usable parts available on Earth, humans have only domesticated a mere 100, and only 22 of these are major crops that feed the world. Since the dawn of agriculture, humans have manipulated plants to alter the way they look, how much they produce, and their resistance to insects or diseases. Ancient Mayan farmers saved seed from plants with desirable traits, while contemporary plant geneticists identify specific traits and transfer them from one plant to another. But when the range of traits chosen becomes increasingly narrow, when genetically diverse varieties are replaced with varieties that are extremely similar, and when the environments that support the wild relatives of our crops are destroyed, the process of putting affordable food on the table breaks down. Dr. Hugh Iltis is no stranger to this narrowing of genetic diversity in the environment. As curator of the plant herbarium at the University of Wisconsin and expert on the origins of corn, he spent much of his life searching for new world treasures in the mountains, jungles, and traditional farmers' fields of the Americas.
There are many areas in the world that have enormous diversity of cultivated plant germplasm. For example, central Mexico, western Mexico, where I work in the Sierra de Manantlan, in that general area there are 35 races of corn, quite distinctive ones. They have different physical attributes. Or in Peru, in the mountains of Peru, there are as many as 60 or 70 named cultivated varieties that the people grow. And if you substitute for all this diversity one or two cultivated strains that are very high yielding under optimum conditions, you wipe out all this genetic diversity that partly nature and partly human selection over the last 5,000–6,000 years has put there.
My feeling is one of real concern about germplasm. I'm most concerned that we have lost the genetic diversity that we had available by deforestation, by destruction of many of our natural habitats, and by doing that, we have seriously cut ourselves short, and particularly our children, because essentially the problem will only worsen. When you're looking at genetic diversity, we have enough genetic diversity for the varieties that we're developing right now, but what happens in the future as our germplasm base becomes narrower and narrower?
University-based scientists aren't the only ones asking this question. It also concerns researchers at many international agricultural institutes, such as the International Maize and Wheat Improvement Center, known as CIMMYT, located in Mexico. These institutes help developing countries improve agricultural productivity. Their scientists ponder the future of genetic resources needed to develop plant varieties that require less water or chemicals. That's one reason CIMMYT maintains one of the largest seed banks in the world, containing over 11,000 genetically different types of corn. The research here has helped reduce world hunger. But these scientists also realize some of the drawbacks to introducing modern, high-yielding varieties into traditional farming systems.
When we introduce varieties that we think will be higher producing, what happens is, because in fact they are higher producing, every grower in a developing country wants to grow the materials we provide, and we essentially replace the genetic diversity that was originally there with what we have provided, which is a much narrower germplasm base.
But why do farmers and agricultural scientists insist on breeding these genetically similar crops? The answer can be found here.
Our consumers demand uniformity in crops. You don't want to go into a store and find very large tomatoes, very small tomatoes, all in one bunch. You want the largest, best looking, best tasting tomatoes you can find. Well, that demands uniformity. It also demands high yield. The only way you can do that really is in a monoculture situation right now. So what it means is you have one combination of genes in a whole large agricultural area. If a disease were to infect, that disease is able to infect the entire area, and every plant is uniformly, equally susceptible to that devastation.
The Maya. This sophisticated Mesoamerican civilization flourished for centuries before the arrival of the Europeans. As with all successful cultures, the Maya established a reliable food supply. Their agricultural predecessors began experimenting with wild grasses some 8,000 years ago. By saving seeds from their best plants, maize or corn was constantly improved. It became the pivotal point of meals, religious ceremonies, and even the scheduling of wars. Centuries before Columbus, however, the Mayan civilization began to crumble. The reasons for this rapid decline continue to be hotly debated. Warfare and disease are often proposed theories. No one is certain. But some anthropologists believe that genetic erosion of the corn crop helped topple this powerful ancient empire.
They developed a special type of terracing system and began to rely more and more on a narrow genetic base, that is, planted fewer and fewer varieties of maize on those terraces. And that, as happens today, a disease, probably some kind of maize mosaic, came along and destroyed the maize corn at that particular point in time, and that was the trigger which led to the collapse of the Maya civilization.
Overdependence on New World crops has occurred repeatedly in the last 500 years, altering the course of human events. By the 1800s, the potato had migrated from the Andean highlands to the Old World, where it eventually became a staple of the Northern European diet. Because of its exceptionally high yield, this wondrous tuber fed vast populations and was in part responsible for fueling the Industrial Revolution. Then, tragedy struck.
One of the great disasters of the last century was the Great Potato Famine in Ireland. And the sole cause of that was the fact that the Irish had come to depend on one variety of potato. And that variety was not tolerant to what is called late blight. And there was by accident a crate of potatoes introduced from Mexico, where this Phytophthora or late blight evolved, into Ireland, and immediately, because every spud was like every other spud, it completely wiped out all of the production in Ireland. So that suddenly people that were eating 15 pounds of potatoes a day had no potatoes to eat. And the result was 2 million, 3 million people died, not only in Ireland, but across the rest of Europe. What happens if in North America, such as in the 1970s, we have another corn blight, and it reduces only the corn production by 20%. At the same time, other events occur, disastrous events. We could find ourselves very quickly in the same situation as the Maya were several thousand years ago.
Although a narrow genetic base in corn is only one theory on the Mayan demise, there's no doubt that this and other Mesoamerican civilizations flourished largely because of these green gold treasures. In the 1990s, these treasures are often hidden beneath the layers of styrofoam, cellophane, and cardboard. Just like ancient civilizations, however, our society thrives and survives on these New World treasures.
The New World foods have not only changed the course of history, they've also changed the way we look at foods, the way we feel about foods, and of course, the way we prepare foods.
Potatoes are the world's most popular vegetable, and in the United States alone, 120 pounds per person are consumed every year.
Potato chips top the snack food popularity charts, and frozen French fries are the #1 frozen vegetable in the world. Corn, potatoes, and chili hide in many processed foods. Just check the label. About half the nation's sweeteners come from corn, and potato-based additives make soups, sauces, and dairy products creamy. Chili is a commonly used natural red food coloring. Salsa has dethroned ketchup as the #1 condiment.
Chili is going to become a very important part of the American diet, not only in the Southwest, but here also on the East Coast.
New York is a very sophisticated, they're very adventurous, and when you give them something good and you give them all these chilies to try, they have a great variety of flavors and they love it.
These New World treasures feed our sweet tooth.
Y'all like to try some? It's really good.
Help us unwind.
Whoa. Hello, baby.
And even make us laugh. Products containing corn, potatoes, and chili make us look better, soothe tired feet, and warm sore muscles, and help protect us.
Over 1,000 police departments all over the country have switched to capsaicin-based sprays rather than the old chemical sprays like mace.
Throughout history, these treasures have been worshipped. They have been celebrated by individuals and the general public across the country. From the whole enchilada fiesta in New Mexico, to the World Potato Exposition in Idaho, to the Mitchell Corn Palace in South Dakota. All this adds up to economic growth. Today's yearly world potato crop is worth more than all the gold and silver the Spanish took from the Americas. And chili fever is fueling new economic opportunities for the agricultural and food industries. Corn is a major U.S. export crop and has a big impact on our nation's balance of payments. In addition to feeding livestock for meat production, refining and processing a $3 bushel of corn can generate over $12 in jobs, taxes, supplies, and transportation. When Columbus hoisted the sails on his 3 tiny ships and launched into the great void, neither he nor his daring crew could have imagined the tremendous impact their journey would have on the world. Today, the legacy of these intrepid explorers lives on.
NASA has become very interested in using potatoes and some other plants for life support in space. Our work here at Wisconsin is concentrated on determining the potential of potatoes and how to use it effectively in space systems. The first work that we did for NASA was to show how many potatoes it would take to keep a person alive, and really how much space it would take to grow potatoes. And we were able to show that an area of about 15 feet by 15 feet was sufficient area to keep a person alive continuously in space.
Can you verbalize how it feels?
Scientists speculate that we have only grazed the surface in terms of medicinal uses for our plant genetic resources. Frank Etzkorn, the New Mexico Tech experimental psychologist who invented the nicotine patch, is looking at the possibility that the substance that makes chili peppers hot could be instrumental in reducing pain.
We'll put powdered habanero pepper, about 1/4 of a gram or a little bit less on each one of their tongues, and then we'll have them rate the pain as it increases, as it invariably will. And at that point, we're suspecting that the body is probably releasing endorphins to try to help attenuate that pain.
Once the pain diminishes, Etzkorn gives the subjects Narcan to lower their endorphin levels. In most cases, the pain returns.
Who would have guessed 50 years ago that eating chili was somewhat akin to an injection of morphine? But that may be what we're talking about. So we're tapping a very ancient mechanism. There's no doubt about that. And its precise function for ancient humans, we really don't know. You can't speculate on that. But what we might find in the future for its use, that's what's exciting.
Exciting as it is, the future of scientific discovery is dependent on having the necessary genetic material. Even with the modern advancements of microbiology, researchers will be severely limited unless diverse plant populations are available. Here, in a remote Arizona canyon, efforts to preserve such genetic treasures have already begun. Working with the nonprofit seed saver organization, Native Seed Search, Kevin Dahl maintains what is thought to be the only designated wild chili preserve in the United States. In this protected area, the wild chili plants are preserved in their natural state so they can continue to develop genetic resistance to new diseases, insects, and environmental stresses.
This is the wild chiltepine plant here in the Wild Chili Reserve. We're preserving it in site. Now, of course, we've also collected seeds and have it in our seed bank and their frozen high-tech storage. But preserving the population intact where it's been growing for centuries gives us both a better protection that it will be preserved, but also a lot more information about how it interacts with the plants and animals around it. In every little canyon around here, different populations of these wild chilies have different genetic characteristics. People come to the Sonoran Desert and see, in some cases, a wasteland, but when I look at the Sonoran Desert, I see a treasure house of genetic material.
Faced with alarming threats to genetic diversity, national and international scientific organizations are developing preservation systems involving a variety of storage techniques and sites. Garrison Wilkes, University of Massachusetts botanist, has seen some encouraging developments internationally, especially with preserving a wild relative of corn called teosinte.
And I think in some parts of the developing world, there will be a willingness, and I've already seen it in Guatemala, to save teosinte, the case in point being teosinte, because it's something that was uniquely theirs in the whole world.
Francisco Vasquez, an agricultural specialist in Guatemala, makes special note of the wild relatives of New World treasures, especially teosinte, which he finds in his country.
This is an endangered species, so we should rescue this species, keeping some seeds in some gene banks. Secondly, we should try to conserve this species in its natural conditions.
In the United States, genetic resources are gathered, cataloged, and preserved at many different levels. At the most basic level, private seed-saving organizations are preserving heirloom and traditional seeds shared within families or Native American tribes.
We started trying to find other people who were also maintaining heirloom varieties and have gradually linked them together into a network.
Various state and regional storage facilities maintain working collections and short-term storage for specific crops. Multiple locations minimize losses if one facility is destroyed. Genetic resources are also maintained at the National Seed Storage Laboratory in Fort Collins, Colorado.
Plant collectors will go out and they'll collect this material. They always share it with the country that they are bringing it from. They'll bring it back to this country, put it in storage, and it is our responsibility then to maintain that in storage for eternity.
Seeds are living organisms and require special care to preserve their genetic treasures.
Our biggest problem is we're long-term storage. And if we could store a seed for eternity without it dying, that would be our goal. And so seed deterioration is the big problem. Once the seed is produced in the field, it starts to deteriorate immediately. Our goal in preserving seed is to decrease the deterioration to a level which will allow it to live for many, many years. We're hoping with liquid nitrogen storage that we can have seeds living for 100 or maybe even 200 years.
It is with a sense of urgency that scientists continue to search, collect, preserve, and maintain these living resources, both in the field and in storage facilities.
When a large tree falls in the forest, there's a splash, and people hear the noise of the crash. But when a gene system disappears in the world, it's silent. And most of the world's not picking up on the loss of genetic erosion.
The degree of genetic erosion, the loss of this variation, we don't really know. All we know is that time seems to be running out, that as world population grows, as we impact more on these natural habitats where these crops are produced, you're going to find less and less of this variability. And one thing is for sure, if we have less variability, it's going to reduce our chances of survival in the future.
If you don't have seeds, you have nothing for the future.
We're losing these species quite rapidly, and hopefully people will become aware of the need to preserve this germplasm and work towards this, because it's not so much for you and me, but it's for our grandchildren, the next generations, that really need this material.
The only way we can give the consumer what they want is to come up with genes. Genes that will confer resistance to insect, resistance to pests, that will give us quality characteristics that the consumer really wants. Genetically is the only way we can do that, because chemicals are just not a part of our future any longer. I mean, I think that people in agriculture know that we have to move away from chemicals to do that.
We have the future in our hands here. We are storing it so that when there's a problem with our food supply in the future, we will have it. This seed is really more valuable than all the gold in Fort Knox. You may have money, but without the seed and the food, you cannot live.
Early agriculturalists of the Americas found and preserved plants' genetic treasures. Benefiting from the knowledge base accumulated by Indian experimenters over thousands of years, modern-day scientists continue the tradition of green gold's advancement. The impacts these New World plants have had on civilizations and cultures around the globe have been tremendous, and they will continue to affect our lives in ways Christopher Columbus could never have imagined.
The real treasure that Columbus took back to Europe and then gave to the rest of the world was the gift of the Indians to Columbus, green gold.
Okay, now that we've enjoyed that show, and you learned a little bit how important it is to preserve our seeds and our ancient genotypes, we're going to talk about another 4-part series now, and this is the Ancient Roots of Modern Medicines. So we'll see that in a little bit.
One in 4 drugs on our pharmacy shelves and 65% of cancer drugs come from plants. Taxol, the most widely used cancer drug in the world, is made from the bark of the Pacific yew. Here in Jordan, Bedouin nomads have been using native plants for medicine for thousands of years. Today, scientists are racing to unlock the secrets of these ancient remedies.
What you have is truly a treasure. What you have is not very available everywhere.
When I started working on these medicinal plants, the first thing I thought of, how powerful are these plants?
The question is made urgent by the ongoing destruction of the natural habitat for these native species. What did ancient practitioners of the healing arts know? And will we be able to use that knowledge to discover new plant-based cures in time? The answers lie in the extraordinary convergence of ancient roots, modern medicine.
To the Western eye, it looks like moonscape. Harsh, barren, unforgiving. This is the body of the Middle East. To look at it in the dry season, which is most of the year, it's hard to believe this land can support life, much less produce plants that are beneficial for humans. But there are those who believe otherwise.
For any person, it is a dry, empty space. But for me, it is paradise.
Jordanian botanist Dr. Sausan Oran is on a journey to catalog and preserve the wild plants of her homeland. She sees beauty in the more than 4,000 varieties of plants she's found to date. Beauty and possibility.
I noticed that 40% of those plants are medicinal. Knowing that our ancestors used those plants for treating medicine, this has encouraged us as scientists or as researchers to look for the specific active compounds. Every time I go to the field, I feel that I'm going to the field for the first time. Why? Because I'm hoping to find something new. Hoping to find medicinal plants with medicinal potential
While out in the field, Dr. Oran seeks out local people and traditional healers to find out how the various plants are used.
This is Gesum.
Do people in this area use this plant?
Yes, they use it. They use it for stomach pain when you get a cold.
Do they boil it and drink it?
Yes, they boil it and drink it, and some people use it with tea.
Which part do they use? All the plant or just the flowers?
Just the flowers.
The medicinal uses of these plants have been tested and refined over thousands of years. For example, these Mediterranean gourds, colocynth, or hansal in Arabic, were used by the Greeks and Romans. Today, pharmacological research is confirming their effectiveness in treating diabetes. Ancient Arabic texts are another important source of information for research on medicinal plants. Many Westerners don't realize that while Europe was in the Dark Ages, Arab physicians of the 8th to the 11th centuries were laying the foundation of the institutions and science of modern medicine. Arab scholars studied and translated the Greek texts. They opened the first true hospitals and pharmacies and designed early clinical drug trials. They understood the importance of diet and produced medical texts that were used until well into the 19th century. What contributions might they make in the 21st century? Dr. Oran and her colleagues believe important clues might lie in Arabic folk medicine, still practiced by the Bedouins, or Bedu, as they call themselves. Tribal nomads, the Bedu proudly trace their lineage back to Ishmael, son of Abraham. They are known for their distinctive tents, which squat low to the ground to withstand stiff desert winds. This is the Badia, a largely undeveloped desert, roughly the size of North Dakota. The Badia makes up 80% of Jordan and reaches into Syria, Iraq, and Saudi Arabia. To survive here, a plant needs deep roots and stamina. With an average annual rainfall of only 2 to 8 inches, seeds can lie dormant for months, even years, waiting for rain. When it comes, usually in the spring, there is an explosion of bloom and new growth. The basalt plains cover much of the northern Badia. These stones make it hard to drive or to walk, for humans and animals alike. Camels, able to travel long distances without water, were for centuries the only reliable transportation in the Badia. But today, herdsmen drive trucks, and camels are greatly outnumbered by sheep and goats who threaten to overgraze this Spartan land. Jordan has 2.5 million sheep, 3 times as many as the land would comfortably support. Further damage occurs when people cut down or dig up woody shrubs for fuel, which worsens erosion and ultimately eliminates that species from the landscape. To raise more food, so-called deep plowing is used to cultivate the edges of the desert, so that grain crops like wheat, barley, and lentils can be planted. The ecology of the Badia teeters on the brink as pressure to feed growing populations increases. The Badia landscape may be inhospitable, but guests are always welcomed in the Bedu tent. No traveler is turned away. Bedu hospitality is legendary and is a matter of honor and pride. Today, guests are expected at the tent of Abu Shayan. The extended family is already making preparations. Bread is being made on a curved metal pan propped up over a fire. Here on the private side of the tent, the women cook and tend the children. At night, the family sleeps here. On the other side of a fabric wall is the public space where guests are received, news exchanged, and coffee served. According to tradition, a goat is slaughtered to prepare a feast for the guests. This marks the day as a special occasion, something that occurs only perhaps once a month. By mid-morning, the sun is already high enough that Abu Shayam and his wife raise the fabric walls to provide more shade and air circulation. Summer days in the Badia can be as hot as 120 degrees Fahrenheit. Nights are much cooler. Winter temperatures get as low as 40 degrees. Snow is rare but not unheard of. Normally, Abu Shayam and his family would live 4 months a year in their cement blockhouse in a town 40 miles away, where the older children attend school. But since the drought of 1991, they've lived year-round in their tent so they can cover the distances necessary to find enough pasture for their sheep. Today, the herd is some 20 miles north, near the Syrian border. Abu Shayam uses this ancient Mercedes truck to visit the herd, haul water from a lake northeast of here, and drive to a market an hour-and-a-half away for fresh vegetables and other supplies. Fuel from propane tanks is supplemented by brush that has been collected from the Badia, a process that can take several hours a day. Bedu collect wild plants and use nearly 170 plant species to treat everything from colds and skin disorders to bites and stings. Today, Abu Shayam is going out to collect Artemisia herbs, alba or wormwood as it is commonly called in English. Abu Shayam knows its many uses.
We use it when we get a bad cold and when we have a bad stomach ache. It's good for the sheep too. When they have stomach worms, this plant kills the worms. It's a good medicine plant. Some people collect it and sell it to the herbalist. They also take it to the pharmacies, and many medicines are made from these plants.
Back at the tent, the food is ready to be served. Abu Shayam invites his guests to a feast featuring a goat and vegetables. Meanwhile, in the kitchen, the Artemisia is boiled with water to make a tea the Bedu use as a general health tonic. Different parts of the plant can also be used to successfully treat diabetes. Just as they move their herds to take advantage of changing pasture conditions, the Bedu shift between folk medicine to modern medicine, depending on the circumstances and the nature of the problem. For example, when Abu Shayam's young son Badi became ill with abdominal pain and a fever, his father took him to a pediatrician in a town 30 miles away. But after 3 weeks of medicine, the boy was no better.
We took him to the doctor, but we got no results. So we took him to the healer, and he is okay.
The healer they visited lives in Safawi, a town an hour-and-a-half away. More than 15,000 Bedu have settled here. Woyed is Bedu, her face tattooed in the old fashion. She says that years ago her people kept camels. Her knowledge of healing has been passed down from her mother and her mother's mother before that. Today, she teaches her son. Much of Woyed's inventory comes from an herbalist. She uses special, non-toxic medicines to treat children. Her reputation is known throughout the Badia.
I treat children from 1 month old to 5 years old. I treat him for ecto and rami, and if he gets a rash on his skin and starts crying, we apply this material to his skin and make him inhale some and cover him. Then he will get well if God helps.
Islam teaches that God has provided a remedy for every illness, and man should search for them and use them with skill and compassion. Bedou healers offer their service free of charge, believing it is their duty to help anyone who needs it. But most patients, like Abu Shayam and his son, return later with a gift for the healer if the cure is successful. Just as in modern medicine, there are many specialists. So too do the traditional Bedou healers have specialties.
My name, Menwar al-Fawaz, from Sardiya tribe. You're welcome to make an interview with my mother. You're welcome in my house.
Patients visit this house, where Menwir gives advice and treats eye problems. Menwir says his mother is between 80 and 90 years old. It's not unusual for older Bedou to be unsure of their age. She learned about the medicinal plants from her mother.
Yes, very wise woman. She have a big mind, and she give advice to Sardiya tribe. They respect my mother.
Menwir, who collects her own plants and dries them, says many are getting more difficult to find. She says that 10 species grown only in her area have already been wiped out. Another healer, Salim, grows 10 different medicinal plants in a special garden. She harvests and dries them for use with patients. Another 10 varieties have to be collected from the wild or gotten from nomadic sheep herders.
I have pain on my arm, and I heard that you have something for it.
Yes, I have medicine for that.
I want you to treat it for me.
This is Hawa Jawani and Haba Samra, cooked in oil.
How many times do I need to do this?
3 days. Take this and use it in the morning and in the evening. This is work. This is Etrophan.
What is the Etrophan for?
It is good for diabetes. This plant for kidneys.
For the one that has kidney problem?
Yes.
If a healer like Salim doesn't have the particular plant a patient needs, that patient is sent to buy it from an herbalist or attar. Abdel Nasser al-Khalidi is an attar in a town called Mafraq. Al-Khalidi has been in the business 15 years and stocks material from more than 200 kinds of plants.
Where do you get all these things? Most of it from Jordan, some from other countries, but the majority from the Jordanian desert. Do you go by yourself and collect them? There are some specialized people who go and collect these plants, and sometimes just regular individuals do. Some of these plants, you cannot find them easily. You find them only in areas where not many people go. In the urbanized areas, they have disappeared.
The plants that attars and healers rely on for their medicines, the plants Dr. Sausan Oran is studying, are increasingly threatened by environmental degradation. Most Jordanians live in the western part of the country. Amman, the capital city, is the largest, with a population of 2 million. Despite the ready availability of modern medicine, you can still find herbalist shops like this one downtown. Efforts are underway to preserve the body as native plants and unlock their secrets, mining age-old folk medicine with the tools of 21st century science.
Knowing that our ancestors used those plants for treating medicine, this has encouraged us as scientists or as researchers to look for the specific active compounds.
Here at the University of Jordan, Dr. Sausan Oran is part of a team of scientists working with native plants. The Jordan Badia Research and Development Program is backed by Jordan's Higher Council for Science and Technology.
We don't work behind desks, we don't work behind fences. We're there with the people, for the people. We want to explore, but we don't want to exploit. And that's, I think, is the difference. There's great potential for economic development through the plants and plant cultivation. Don't forget, I think the important thing is here that we're not teaching anybody new or totally different, something out of the culture, something that needs a lot of training or expensive training.
When I started working on these medicinal plants, the first thing I thought of, how these plants, how powerful are these plants?
For more than 2 decades, Dr. Oran has been seeking out her country's native plants and bringing them back to her lab to be catalogued and studied. Named Sausan by her lawyer father for the national flower of Jordan, the black iris, Dr. Oran learned to love wildflowers as a child. Years ago, she chose botany over a more prestigious career in medicine. Ironically, the research she's doing today on plants could lay the groundwork for new medical treatments. Dr. Oran is excited about helping to discover the potential of what she calls Jordan's wild medical wealth.
Very little has been done on these, which I consider very promising plants for everybody.
She began by collecting and cataloging the wild plants of her homeland. The herbarium she started now has more than 4,000 different species, identified and labeled by their Latin botanical names. The plants, which are treated to protect them from damage and decay, are preserved for anyone who wants to learn about this rich resource. The herbarium also has a seed gene bank to ensure that this national heritage can be fully developed in the future. Some of the endangered species have the potential to become commercial crops that will help the economy. Others, like the plants the Bedou use, may have medical or pharmaceutical uses. But first, they must be saved from extinction. In this sterile tissue culture room, Dr. Oran and her colleagues are finding ways to grow many new plants from tiny seeds, pieces of leaves, or simple root tissue. The plant matter is grown in a nutrient medium in petri dishes under laboratory conditions. When all goes well, a tissue mass called a callus develops.
This is the product. When I get the callus, of course I feel happy, because when I treat it later with a combination of hormones, this will differentiate in a further stage into the different parts of the plants. This is a small fragment of a whole bulb from a plant called black iris. So from this fragment I can get, as you see, 3 to 4 plantlets.
Once the plants have reached a certain stage in the lab, they are ready to be acclimatized and planted outdoors.
They're so beautiful, aren't they?
The plan is to re-establish them in the wild and save them from extinction due to over-collecting by people and overgrazing by livestock.
This plant is just not only beautiful flower, showy flower, but it's well-known fact. It's been used by the old ancient people.
If folk medicine has provided the clues that launched the search, it is science that dictates the process.
We don't need the whole plant for our tests. Sometimes seeds, we take seeds sometimes we take flower. So it depends on the uses of this plant, which active part of this plant has to be used for our test. We grind the leaves, for example. We take the powder, put it simply in a little amount of boiled water, shake it. Then we wait until the precipitate comes down to the bottom of the test tube. This liquid part, this is the important part of the plant because it's got the active ingredients.
The chemical compound is sent to university chemists for identification and analysis.
As a scientist and as a researcher, I have to know which is the compounds that are responsible for treating these diseases or these ailments.
A series of tests have shown that many wild Jordanian plants can inhibit the growth of tumors. Dr. Oran is especially excited about a breakthrough with a plant called globularia from the south of the country. Tissue culture has helped re-establish it in the wild. Even more exciting, results from tests done with globularia extract shows it inhibits tumors on potatoes 85% of the time. That anti-leukemic result is so strong that further trials are now being done with animals. Dr. Oran dreams of helping to cure leukemia in humans.
If they manage to apply what we started and find it very much applicable and successful, I feel that I managed to achieve a victory. I think that this is the most important thing, the most achievable thing that have ever done in my life. And I'll feel great, really, I'll feel great.
Another day ends for Abu Shayam and his family. In the Badia, modern forces are slowly changing this lifestyle that had remained essentially unchanged for at least 5,000 years. Along with the lifestyle, cures used by ancient cultures may be disappearing. If the native medical plants become extinct, humankind may have lost powerful new drugs to fight some of our deadliest diseases.
The plants in the Middle East, I can describe them as valuable treasure. We have responsibility, for the sake of saving our wild plants, our natural resources, and saving the earth as much as we can for our generation and for the generations to come.
Next time on Ancient Roots, Modern Medicine. Along the U.S.-Mexico border, people have been using medicinal plants for thousands of years. Now, American scientists are tapping into that precious knowledge. From an innovative program at New Mexico State University to cancer tests at cutting-edge research labs, young scientists are discovering the power of nature's wonders and perhaps the next breakthrough cure. For more information on Ancient Roots, Modern Medicine, log on to www.rootsandmedicine.com. As researchers work to discover new drugs to defeat cancer, they're looking in some unexpected places. Here in Mexico, native healers have been using medicinal plants for thousands of years. Today, some of those plants are providing important clues for scientists trying to develop new medicines.
After all, many medicines are based on herbal principles, you know. Many herbs have given us the active principle and the synthetic medicines.
Most of our anti-cancer drugs, or at least many of them, are derived from natural sources, plants and microorganisms.
The possibilities of native plants have captured the imagination of Dr. Mary O'Connell and her students at New Mexico State University. In a special program funded by the National Institutes of Health, these young scientists are helping identify and begin the analysis of medicinal plants of the desert Southwest. Someday, this work may lead to new cures, and people everywhere will benefit from the extraordinary convergence of ancient roots, modern medicine.
Morning in Oaxaca. This region of the southern coast of Mexico is one of the world's great centers for crafts and folk art, with a history reaching back more than 2,000 years. The tradition is very much alive today. Many villages here specialize in a single craft: pottery from local clays, weaving from sheep's wool, basketry made of palm fronds, or the fanciful wooden carvings known as alebrijes. In this village of Arasola, many families have home studios where they carve copal wood from nearby forests. Other family members do the intricate painting that brings these imaginative carvings to life. These wooden creatures, monsters, animals, and everything in between, are popular with tourists for their beauty and authenticity. With few modern conveniences and an agrarian economy, the local people have a close relationship with nature. They use native plants for food, for their livelihood, and for healing.
My mother showed me because her children would get sick, and she would look for herbs. She would bathe us or give us something to drink. I remember the herbs she used, so I could use them too.
Amada Aguilares Martinez is a curandera, a healer. She collects dozens of different herbs from the land near her village and still others from a distant canyon during the rainy season.
I do work with herbs, but I also work with God, because God gave us these plants on the land to cure His children. Here, and this one is called chepito. What is chepito good for? It is good to use against colds. And this one is called yerba moradita. It is good for when you eat something spicy, and if you have heartburn, you can take some of this and it will go away.
The people who come to her pay Amada whatever they think it's worth, although she says another curandero nearby does have set rates for his cures. Since modern doctors are far away and more expensive, herbal healers are the primary source of medical care for many Oaxaqueños, who are mostly subsistence farmers. Amada is sad that none of her children wanted to learn from her. They've all moved away from the village. She worries her knowledge of desert plants will die with her.
What I tell people is that they need to learn, because I will not live forever.
But today, worries are set aside. This is the feast of St. Andrew the Apostle, patron saint of this village. These boys and girls receive their first communion and share a special blessing from the Virgin Mary by passing out colorful paper flowers. Among those returning to celebrate with the village is one of Amada's former patients, Rosalina Sanchez Mendoza. She and her husband, Prisciliano Cortez Cruz, have brought their youngest daughter, Hiral, to see her grandparents for the first time. Rosalina's mother has been busy preparing food for the festival. Today, she and Rosalina get some dried native corn, a major local crop ready to be soaked, ground, and made into tortillas. The visit goes quickly, and soon it's time for the couple to leave the old life and return to what they hope will be a much better future. Like so many other Mexicans eager to work, that means that they head north. A 3-day journey by bus on rough roads to La Frontera, the border. Their new home, Ciudad Juarez, is separated from El Paso, Texas by the Rio Grande. Buses come here to bring workers to the maquiladores factories run just across the Mexican border by American companies. There they can earn in 1 hour what is a full day's wage for a man elsewhere in Mexico, about $2. Most live in outlying districts called colonias, in one-room buildings made of cement if they're lucky, but often in tin or even cardboard shacks. There's no indoor plumbing, running water and electricity are only recently available. Streets are unpaved, dust and wild dogs everywhere. Crime is rampant. Still, there is the hope of a better life, if not for Rosalina and Prisciliano, then at least for their 4 children. Here in Anapra, on the outskirts of Juarez, the older children can go to school. Prisciliano's family, unlike most of their neighbors, has running water. Prisciliano's 70-year-old mother would rather be back in her old village, but lives with them to help out with the children and the chores.
Buenas tardes.
Rosalina goes door to door in the better, older neighborhoods of Juarez to sell the baskets, purses, and animal figures that Prisciliano weaves at home.
For us, weaving is like an inheritance that our grandparents left us, and we go out in the city and find ways to earn money with our work, because we know there are others that when they get to the city, they don't know where to go or what to do. They don't have money, and they don't know where to work to earn some money, but at least we can trust that we know what to work on. Even though we know we will struggle, but we can weave this little animal and go to a house and sell it, and we can earn 5 or 10 pesos and then share it with the family.
Prisciliano says he loves weaving. He learned from his father and is teaching his children. There have been some modern enhancements.
This needle is made out of a car antenna, and here we just took it to be cut, and this helps us a lot.
So far, between the weaving and playing in a band, Prisciliano earns just barely enough to buy groceries for the family. Most meals are tortillas, beans, and rice. It's a lean existence. There's no extra money for medicine. When one of the children is sick, Rosalina and Prisciliano come to Cristo Rey, a missionary clinic started 4 years ago by Dr. San Juana Mendoza.
I come from a mining family. My father, my grandfather, my uncles, they were miners. They work in the Sierra Madres of Chihuahua, and I was aware somehow about the hardness of living in isolated places and living with no medical sources available. And was for me a very deep memory, very sad memory, seeing my mom not sleeping in the whole night because she had a baby sick, and she didn't have sources sometimes to go to a doctor. And for me, that was a very painful, a very pitiful memory to see a mother suffering because the child is sick. We have population that comes from the country areas of the south of Mexico, like Oaxaca, and they come to the north, migrating, looking for job opportunities. These people are very, very low education and low income. Their average income is about $35 to $45 per week. Their main source of work is the factories, the maquilas. And it's very hard for them to keep a steady employment. And they have a steady income. Unfortunately, their lifestyle changed for bad. They tend to buy fritos, they tend to buy junk food, and they tend to get very addicted to sodas, to sugar. So they start developing diseases that were not common in their villages, like hypertension, diabetes, arthritis, even depression. This is very sad.
This young woman suffers from diabetes and high blood pressure. A prescription drug can help control it, but it is very expensive. So Dr. Mendoza teaches her about some herbal remedies that can help her reduce the dose she needs.
I recommend them to use, natural things that are available, like a healthy diet, a healthy plan of exercising, and also to use wild herbs that are available in our community. One of those herbal remedies is named prodigiosa. Also, we call it hamula, and the scientific name is Bruchelia grandiflora. And it grows wild here. It's about 1 meter or 2 meters high. And this herbal is very efficient to lower the blood sugar levels. And the people can grow them themselves, in pots. They can grow them in their homes and have it fresh. And the only thing that takes is just to make an infusion, a little tea, and drink it 2 or 3 times a day. Sometimes my patients come here, with 400s, with 500s of blood sugar, and they, with medication, diet, and exercise again, combined with this herbal medicine, they can go in normal limits. So I encourage them, not only to look for the herb, but to plant it in their own homes. After all, many medicines are based on herbal principles, Many herbs have given us the active principle and the synthetic medicines. I see bunches of patients, lots of families, they migrate from the countryside, and they tend to disconnect themselves with the roots, with the cultural roots, and they tend to forget the ancestors' knowledge. Every tribe used to have their own medicines and their own spices and their own food. One of my duties is to remind them about this link between them and their environment, to help them to recognize all these sources that we have, to recognize the plants and to accept and to come back to the practical herbs that can save them money, can help them to stay healthy, and make them more independent. But this desert is alive, it's full of life, it's full of plants, it's full of richness, it's full of sources for people to have a better life and even to fight some diseases. ¿Qué le pasa, muchito?
Today, Rosalina and Prisciliano have brought in 5-year-old Iran, who has been complaining about a blister in his mouth. They pay a very modest fee and bring the doctor one of the animals Prisciliano has woven. After an exam, she prescribes a rinse made from aloe vera and an herb called malva, which is inexpensive and available at the local market. If that doesn't clear up the infection, only then will she prescribe a modern medicine.
Medicine is very expensive, especially that they don't have insurance or medical benefits.
Dios te bendiga, Prisciliano.
I regard myself like a healer. Still, my main concern is how to teach the people to stay healthy, to stay in the right path, and to prevent complications that will take them to hospitals or traumatic treatments. This is one of my goals, and this is my reward. If eventually a woman comes to me and she said, you know, I know how to take care of certain illnesses. I don't have to come to you. I feel like clapping. I feel like laughing and praising God.
That passion for educating others about the value of native herbal remedies has brought Dr. Mendoza to New Mexico State University in Las Cruces. She comes to this summer workshop run by Dr. Mary O'Connell. For 6 weeks, students study medicinal plants of the Southwest.
Bueno, pues muchísimas gracias por haberme invitado. Thank you very much for having invited me.
Dr. Mendoza has been invited to share her experiences treating patients with medicinal herbs, many of which are found on both sides of the border.
It's kind of ashy green color. It has a very delicate and very remarkable aroma, and the leaves are very distinguished, like a little saw. And once that you see it, you smell it, you have it in your hands, you will not forget it.
The workshop, now in its 4th year, is funded by the National Institutes of Health.
The goal of the NIH-funded project is that these students would be attracted, trained, and ultimately pursue PhD degrees in any number of disciplines that constitute biomedical research. Chemistry, biology, physiology, medicinal plants, natural products chemistry, microbiology, bioengineering, all kinds of specific topic areas.
The program has special appeal for students from minority cultures.
Many students in the Southwest come from cultures that use plants as medicines for improving quality of life issues, for relieving minor aches and pains, for colds, for treatments of modest infections. And so it's very, very reasonable to excite these students about how the chemistries in those plants could be studied to have an efficacy in a biomedical context.
Once I got really sunburnt really bad, and my grandpa, he's not a medicine man, but he knew basic things, how to use certain plants, and he made this sort of like pasty stuff, and he put it on my skin, and it soothed it.
In the old days, they used to do that.
My grandmother did. She used a lot of plant materials, whether they be boiled or actually eaten directly, for anything from cuts to wounds to intestinal problems to pink eye.
Today, the class is on an herb walk in the nearby Organ Mountains. Dr. O'Connell has invited nurse and herbalist Deborah Brandt to lead the class.
I'm on the State Board of Nursing, the Integrative Medicine Committee, where we're trying to integrate and bring together different traditions and different aspects of medicine. This is a good area for medicinal plants because it's in a transitional zone between the lower desert and the higher desert, and so there's a lot of overlap. That's why I like this trail for medicinal plants. We've seen probably 15 or 20 plants: Brachialia, Garrya, silk tassel. We've seen mesquite, acacia, prickly pear, the cholla, desert willow.
They're learning the basics with botany of these plants, why local peoples use them and how they use them. They're also appreciating how the environment will influence the growth of these plants, how not any one plant is the same as any other plant, what the effects of those then might be on considerations of how these compounds accumulate in the plant.
It's called mariola, and if you smell it, it's...
Everyone is a scientist. Humans are scientists. That's what brings me to work every day, is how does this work? How does this organism behave? Why does this plant make this chemical? That's a whole other side to the project we really haven't described yet. We as humans think the plants make drugs. The plants make chemicals for their own uses, and we've learned how to exploit them. And so these same chemicals that plants make to attract animals as pollinators or repel animals because they chew them up are then the same chemicals that then become useful to us in a drug setting. We have generated a list of plants to study based on probably 100 years of what's called ethnobotanical literature. The basis or the hypothesis is that if you use plants as a source of drugs that have been identified by cultures as being important medical agents, you increase the odds of finding efficacious chemistries 2 to 3-fold. So the drug companies know this factor. Medical communities understand this. So what we're hoping to show is that students will learn how drugs are developed by studying the whole process of chemical syntheses, chemical extractions, the analytical tools, and then testing those chemistries for their efficacy.
The students spend hours learning precise lab procedures to be used on the plants.
How to extract and purify the compounds, how to identify them structurally, what kinds of solvents to use, how to design biological experiments to test for the ability of some of these extracts in controlled settings to inhibit the growth of different microorganisms.
But they also discuss the ethics involved in collecting native plants from the wild.
You could say plagiarizing, but the word biopiracy is being used now to describe the collecting of plant material, information about biological materials from all around the world.
Would India have any sovereign rights over the plant?
Yes. And this is the idea that developed nations go to regions of high genetic or biological diversity and collect from there valuable plant or animal materials, living materials, and use those in another context, and then often sell them back to the country from which this material originated.
Not only are students exposed to the ethics of biopiracy in developing countries, but Dr. O'Connell has arranged an exciting collaboration with a cutting-edge research center. A small group of young scientists will be taking their desert plants to Seattle for testing.
I want to welcome you to the Fred Hutchinson Cancer Center and hope you have a productive and instructive couple of days with us. My lab at the Hutchinson Center specializes in drug discovery, and the group at New Mexico State studies native plants of the Southwest. Plants have always been a rich source of biologically active compounds, medicinal compounds, and so we saw an opportunity to put together a program where we would screen compounds extracted from southwestern plants in our anti-cancer assays.
The students brought not only their compounds, but their enthusiasm and their own reasons for pursuing this kind of research.
This is kind of a personal issue. And this actually started back in 1993 when my mother was actually diagnosed with breast cancer. She had a mastectomy, which, as you all know, is a removal of the breast. And that to me just was kind of like an awakening. It's what I wanted to do. I was a realist. I knew that I wasn't going to be able to play sports all my life. I've always been a fan of science. It's a totally different world.
Other natives in New Mexico, indigenous people I'm speaking about, have used this plant for illnesses in the stomach, so all the gastrointestinal problems. And so hopefully I can find some activity from this plant for something of that nature.
And then I broke down the plant into its separate organs, leaf, roots, and stems.
The great data drive ends up with lots of information, but one of the key points is to keep track of what everybody did. And so if a mistake is made in which well a sample goes into, or a code is incorrectly entered, we can spend a lot of time retracing errors and waste time and money. So what I'm doing is making sure that we know exactly what went into those wells, and so we can go back and find those plants, find the extracts, work them up, purify compounds from them, should any of these crude preparations have an interesting activity.
Most of our anti-cancer drugs, or at least many of them, are derived from natural sources, plants and microorganisms. So over the millennia that evolution has worked on these sources, they have developed very sophisticated pathways to produce small molecules, what we know as drugs. And that evolutionary process has yielded things that are very specific in their action. what we're trying to do is to discover whether that specificity is useful in the treatment of cancer. There are over 100 specific diseases, specific indications that we collectively call cancer, and those all have unique genetic fingerprints. So the likelihood that any single drug will be active against the whole spectrum of tumors is small. What we're trying to do is now match specific medicines with specific genetic fingerprints to treat cancers.
Today, the students are testing their plant extracts in baker's yeast.
We've genetically modified these yeasts to model some of the genetic alterations that occur in human cancers. The development process, should we see promising activity, is long and complicated, but fairly predictable. So first we would fractionate the crude extracts into individual compounds and isolate the individual chemical that's responsible for the activity. It would then go through a process of preclinical testing, where we would test it using human cancer cell lines, as well as cancer models in animals. It would go through toxicology testing to make sure that it's a safe compound, and ultimately, if all those are positive, into human clinical trials.
Simon says developing a new drug can take anywhere from 5 to 10 years and cost hundreds of millions of dollars. Still, he sees reason for optimism.
There's always a chance that medicinal compounds will be found in the most unlikely places. The Pacific yew tree is something that we see here in Seattle almost every day, and it looks not terribly promising, but it's a source of Taxol, which is one of the most effective anti-cancer agents known. So yes, I'm very optimistic that we will find something.
In fact, these three plants, bearberry, datura, and wild mustard, brought by New Mexico State students, showed promising results in the first round of tests. Or perhaps the next breakthrough may come from the medicinal plants that Rosalina and Prisciliano buy at their local herb market. These botanical wonders, like the ones from New Mexico State, could hold valuable clues for medical researchers. And one day, people everywhere will benefit from the coming together of ancient roots, modern medicine.
Next time on Ancient Roots, Modern Medicine. Journey to the exotic Caribbean island of Curacao, where Dina Firis is on a crusade to preserve her homeland's diminishing medicinal plants. And see how scientists are unlocking the power of the island's botanical wealth. From the Divi tree's ability to fight staph infections to mermaid's hair, a coastal algae with the promise of cancer cures. For more information on Ancient Roots, Modern Medicine, log on to www.rootsandmedicine.com.
Hi, I'm Jeannie Gleason. Welcome to the director's interview here for Ancient Roots Modern Medicine. This is Patrick Holian, my co-director, co-producer in crime for the last 18 years. And the piece we're going to be talking about today is a three-part series, Ancient Roots Modern Medicine, funded by the International Arid Land Consortium, that takes you to Jordan, the borderlands of U.S. and Mexico, and Curacao.
I think what's really interesting about this series and what makes it unique from other documentaries on this topic is the locale of where we filmed it. We had very strict criteria in meeting the documentary framework Number one, we chose to do this in arid lands, those lands of the planet that aren't as exposed as much as those of like the rainforest, and look at those areas where a lot of filmmakers haven't been. But it was more than just geography. We needed to framework within that traditional culture. That's the ancient roots part of the film. And then there also had to be the modern science aspect of it, ongoing researchers in these regions, and the connection between the modern scientist and the traditional groups. What we ended up finding after looking at all those criteria for all the subject matters was only a handful of places in the entire globe that had this. As Jeannie mentioned, we ended up going to the Middle East, to Jordan, and following a Bedouin tent family and working with Dr. Sausan Oran from the University of Jordan in her scientific research. We followed up the same thing in the U.S.-Mexico borderlands with Dr. Mary O'Connell from New Mexico State University. And we looked at the rich curandera culture of the American Southwest and Mexico. And the story obviously ended up at the Cancer Research Institute up in Seattle. And then in Curacao, we had the wonderful island culture, but it's a dry island, not your typical palm tree studded Caribbean island. That of Curacao with cactus and rough landscape, where we met Dina Ferris, the healer, and then we followed the science of John de Freitas, who works on and lives on the island, and then also that of Bill Gerwick, who's done some extraordinary work with mermaid's hair and as an anti-cancer fighting agent. So it was very difficult to find those, but when we did, the stories unfolded splendidly.
You know, it might be interesting to you to note that while we've got a very supportive crew back here at home, this was not a major funded documentary with lots of people in the field. It was basically Patrick and I. Patrick did all of the initial research, wrote one of the scripts, did all of the initial contacts, and we would go into the field, and it's always kind of fun. We go in, and I'm sort of like the director and shake hands with everybody, and I say, we need about half an hour to set up, and then take off my coat and get down on my hands and tape cables down and run audio, and Patrick's doing the camera work. So it's been a very fun adventure doing this piece, and I hope you enjoy looking at it as much as we have enjoyed taping it and all the adventures. We want to invite you to, after you've watched the whole piece, to go back again and listen to the director's commentary, who will be telling some of the fun stories and answering some of the questions that people ask as we have shown it around the country. And people look at it and they say, oh, what about this, what about this? We'll try to answer some of those questions. So there is another track of the director's commentary, and we'll just be chatting with you on that. So see you there.